Welcome to episode 5 of our study, Sage Family Edition.
Yeah.
The effort and the goal here is to partner with your growth. I'm here with Ashley Martinis and Isabelle Parker, wonderful professionally trained counselors. I'm a pastor, and in this episode we will be focusing on raising kids.
Yeah.
It's an exciting topic. I have 4, 5 years and under.
4.
3.
Yes. We win.
You
or
do
lose, depending on
how you look at it.
And today we'll be focusing on honestly understanding the their age and the training of their brains. This is an exciting topic for me. I have my degree in psychology, and so we're gonna talk about some really good things, but also connect it to our faith reality, our spiritual reality, and what this looks like. Always creating those bridges, because it's the effort of growth,
Right.
Not alienating any one degree of thought, but understanding that biblical concepts can be found and seen in really researched ideas. So I'm excited about this. And so first up, what are we looking at here with raising our kids?
Well, I think one thing I always like to start with clients is what we call psychoeducational, which for me is
Big word.
Right? Is informing them basically on what is going on with your kid or with yourself in this developmental stages. So there's many studies on people have different developmental stages in their life, and certain behaviors are normal within that stage.
So infant, toddler.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even an infant, right?
Teen.
A 0 to 3 months is different than a 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months to 12 months is very different. What are the milestones they're going to be going through? What are some of the symptoms of, hey, there's a really big problem, or hey, this is really just normal behavior for this age, right? What are important developmental milestones that they need to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously potty training is a really huge one that people struggle with a lot. Sleep training is one people struggle with a lot. And how, as parents, are we normalizing the struggle, or are we going, I'm a bad parent, or my kid's a bad kid, when actually some of these milestones are just very developmentally appropriate?
Right, like Presley just developed, she's going to be 2 here in just a couple weeks, and she developed the toddler kind of patterns just recently, where she's become more no is really patterned, and having some defiance things in there. And at first you almost forget. This is our 3rd, and so you almost can forget that, this is kind of part of that development phase. And at first you're like, what happened? Like, what did what did we do wrong, or what did
my
Ashley
angel
do
go?
wrong? Yeah. But this is important to understand. It's a part of a development.
And it's actually an important part of development, right? There's 2 times in a child's life where there's a lot of no's going on.
Yeah.
And one is in toddlerhood, when they become a toddler and they start saying no. And what that's doing is, I know the difference between me and you, and I'm starting to learn how to execute boundaries.
Yeah.
So when a parent railroads those boundaries and doesn't allow the child to have any no's, that can be really harmful to a kid knowing when to say no and learning to have appropriate boundaries, right? I remember when I was growing up, having to say yes or say hi to certain people, give hugs to certain people, where I've really tried to be delicate with my child. I'm not saying I've never made them hug somebody they've said no to, but I try to really strengthen that part of them that's saying, no, this person feels unsafe.
Yeah.
I want them to know that they need to learn to trust themselves, because sometimes people are unsafe. Right? And so I want them to have that natural sense of boundaries. So it happens then. And when's the second time no's happen a lot? Teens, right?
They're great.
But teens will never leave the house if parents would never want teens to leave the house, and teens would never leave the house if there wasn't a type of stirring and autonomy, which we call them knowing who they are, them feeling confident, them wanting to be their own adult. And so that has to be a painful process. Otherwise, kids will never leave the house. Parents would never want them to leave.
How do you manage this no or this strength development in kids?
That's a good one, because I have a 5-year-old, and she's at an age where I think she knows right from wrong, but also developmentally there's ages where they can't really comprehend what's right from wrong. They know, but the whole consequence thing is not the next thought pattern for them. If I do this, I lose my mom's phone for the day or whatever, right? To be on YouTube and stuff like that. So it's knowing that, and I think going back to the appropriate consequences, I would say, for the age development they're at.
Right.
So a 2-year-old that's the age they're at, where they're saying no, they're kind of pushing boundaries, they're like throwing stuff. That's part of that developmental stage. But parents, I think when you see your 2-year-old throw something at another kid, you automatically want to correct the behavior, go to timeout. And that's great, but it's doing it in their time frame where they can understand, like, you have 5 minutes and not like an hour, or not like you're going to go over here because of that behavior.
Right. So for me, it's like knowing what's developmentally appropriate, so we don't start labeling our children too. I hear a lot of people saying, like, this is a difficult child, right? Or this is my sensitive child. So you have to realize there's like gender differences, there's developmental differences, personality differences. And so instead of like labeling a child with negative labels, I think first it's really important as a parent, like, educate yourself. And that's a huge part for me. And if I'm training my child, I first need to educate, like, what's normal, what's not, right? And I have to think about it, like, training my child. I don't know how many times I've seen clients go, I don't know where this behavior came from, but the parents are doing it to each other. And it's like, well, I'm a parent. Or, oh, what's wrong with my kid today? Well, do you ever wake up on the wrong side of bed? No. Do you ever feel exhausted because you have a lack of sleep, right? Like, it's like we don't think about that for our kids. You have a brand new baby. And so Presley going into this new stage, it could easily be like, what's wrong with my kid? Well, it's like, hey, we're adjusting to new family system. Hey, we're tired because there's a new baby around. Or, hey, we're getting different types of attention from our parents. Not negative or positive, just different. It takes them time to adjust. Does it take time for you and your wife to adjust to a new baby? Why wouldn't a kid experience that? So people forget those kind of things, and I just think it starts with educating yourself.
There's an important understanding to have of these growth patterns and a patience to develop in them. And I think turning down the volume on your own kind of, I need to be respected, and almost kind of creating an appropriate interpretation of, is this behavior meant to be disrespectful, like intended to? Because there's a difference in when your kid's intention is to disrespect you, and when then they've begun to develop new patterns of behavior that you deem are disrespectful. Because I find this in a lot of conversations with parents, is that tension between, like, you will respect me.
You will not disrespect me.
And I completely understand the desire to be respected. I think we all have a drive to be respected to some degree. But understanding that it's not always a threat level orange offense to your respect tones. For sure. And a lot of it is patient partnership to cultivate respectful behavior.
As you're sharing that, I think of like my 13-year-old, right? Where in our culture, to walk away from your parent is very disrespectful. Like, you do not get to walk away. You stand there and you listen till I'm done, and then you can go. Like, that's how we were raised.
Even if it's till next Tuesday.
Yeah, you will hear me out, right? But now, like, with Ava at her age and where she's at, it's like sometimes she does have to walk away. And I think I've taught her that, like, you can step away if you're feeling like I'm attacking, verbally, or I'm like giving you all this discipline and you don't want to hear it. If you do it in a nice way, like, don't tell me off and take off, but kind of like, I'm going to my room, and you don't slam the door and you go to your room. That's appropriate for a 13-year-old to be able to do that. But when you get caught up in this respect thing of like, no, you will stand there, that's like almost control.
It is
and controlling children usually doesn't produce very great kids as well, because they feel like they have to meet these certain things for you, and they're not given the ability to express themselves
and to have their needs met, right? So I remember it's good. I always say, like, a lot of times my spouse's behavior and my kids' behavior isn't always a reflection of me. Like, a lot of times it has a reflection on what they're experiencing developmentally in their day, whatever's going on. And so I remember the first time my eldest told me he hated me. It was probably 2 or 3. I hate you. And I remember as a kid that being a really bad thing for me to say to my parents. And I don't want my kid to say that. But he was 2 or 3. He doesn't realize the real impact of that. So what I started to do, instead of, no, you don't. You don't hate me. You love me. I would say, I know you're angry with me right now, and it's okay for you to be upset. Can we express it differently? Instead of going, no, you don't. You can't say that. Da-da-da. What he's really trying to say is, he's mad at me. And he's allowed to be mad at me. But a lot of parents would even say, no, being mad at me is disrespectful. Come on. Like, it's not disrespectful to be upset. It's what we do in that anger. And so instead of going, you should know better not to say that, there's no way Luke at 2 or 3 could know better not to say that.
The other day, my kids Presley, my second youngest, called me a poopy booty. And then they all got together and started chanting poopy booty. Daddy's a poopy booty. And so I put them in timeout, and they're still in timeout 1 week later. No, but I think it's interesting because if you look at how we raise our kids in a spiritual sense, we have these really big, beautiful, like, you're going to change the world. You're a mountain mover. This is language we have in our community. You're a water walker. And we talk about these things that are very impactful. But when you're talking about impact, you're actually talking about developing somebody to understand their strength, when to apply it, and when not to. But if you are insisting on somebody not being capable of understanding their strength and how to exercise it, their no, or when they move things, when not to move things, when to tear something down, when not to tear it down because it's not yours to tear down. These are places of maturity. And some adults a lot of adults are, and all of us are still learning, like, oh, that's a time not to tear something down, but actually
like,
to
exactly.
respect it.
Sometimes we have higher expectations from our kids than we're executing ourselves.
But we have these beautiful dreams of our kids being world changers. So I think it'll be important in understanding that when my kid's strong-willed, or when my kid is not understanding boundary, that understanding it not as like oh boy, I got a real case on my hands, but I actually have somebody with a high degree of understanding of how to break through. And now they don't understand the application of that, but boy, isn't that just the process of maturing?
You just did something that I really love that when people do, we call it a reframe. You can put it in this box of like, oh, we have somebody who breaks boundaries and doesn't respect boundaries, or, oh, wow, I have somebody who knows how to break through. And that's what I choose to do with my kids, because usually, even as adults, our biggest strengths are our biggest weaknesses. And so if you have a parent that's like cultivating, this is your biggest strength, I want to help you learn how to navigate this strength rather than labeling it in a negative frame. I think that's really empowering to a parent.
It's the difference between appropriate resisting or rebellion. Like if Winston Churchill had never learned the strength of resistance, then you wouldn't have seen England be able, we will never surrender.
Most major shakers probably were what people would call difficult children.
And they have a big no.
A big no or a big yes.
Or a big yes if there's something they desire or want. And that's where I think it's really beautiful to have these conversations, because when you talk about raising kids, you talk about the beauty of power and love. And the way when you put them two together, you have the almost context for power. That when I'm powerful, I don't always apply my power to you, but I do it in the context of love, meaning it's in partnership, it's in great clarity and communication, it's in a connectiveness, it's the truth and love dynamic that says I'm first connected and first in love, and then the other elements help that love become real. This is cool.
I think also separating the behavior from the child.
Because
sometimes it's very quick to be like, you did this, but like when you yelled at this kid, so the action as opposed to them. So you want to separate the two. So the child doesn't feel like they're bad. It's just your actions are not meeting, what's acceptable. Like socially, you can't just punch someone in class, stuff like that. Like you do have to teach them those behavioral control components. But also I think separating them, their identity to their action, I think helps you, be more present with your kid and help them understand.
That sounds similar to something we talked about in marriage, though, right? It's that non-judgment, describing the behavior. This behavior affects people or us this way. That's how you want to approach a child, instead of, you're a difficult child. That's a label, that's a judgment. You're rebellious. None of those statements I've seen produce positive response or positive relationship, because in the end of the day, for me, I'm like, hey, kids, we're in relationship. And so that's how respect is built, is in relationship. Yes, my relationship, I have more power, I have more strength right now, but we're still in relationship. You have a voice. You can tell me things I don't like to hear.
That's good.
Because when my kids are really mad at me, at the end of the day, often they're kind of right.
Sure. Okay, so this is good. So understanding the phases and the parts and the developments of your kid's life is so important. And seeking to partner in that growth journey and cultivating respect, cultivating love, and powerful kids is a beautiful journey, one that you're going to thrive in. I know it. if you apply yourself to really learning as a parent the way to partner well, and soundly, strongly, and with peace and wisdom. You're amazing. You got this.